Hello, Carolyn Peeler here with you in Ellen Hutson's classroom, and today I have a Father's Day card tutorial to share with you. Today's project is going to feature the Mama Elephant Bear Hug stamp, and we're going to use the stamp on the bottom left of the package. To get started, we're going to ink with the Distress ink, and I'm starting with the pumice stone, and then I'm going to follow up with the hickory smoke. You can see after I've stamped the image, I also stamp or smush the ink pad into my Ranger craft sheet because I'm using that as the base for my watercolor. I also spritzed some water there so that I could mix the ink with the water to get a more washed out color, to get a sheerer version of the color. So now I'm starting to color the stamped image. I am using the Zig watercolor brush, and I'm starting by mixing the water with the pumice stone. The pumice stone is the lighter of the two gray inks that I have here. It also has a little bit more of a green undertone to it. So I'm just starting to lay that color down, and now as you can see, I'm coming in with some of that hickory smoke, and I'm hitting the outside of the bear's image. I'm wanting that part to look like it's a little bit more shadowed, more in the background as opposed to the foreground. I'm going to do the same thing with the little guy. I'm going to start with the pumice stone and then add the hickory smoke. Now on the small guy, I'm going to be adding my darker color, the hickory smoke, particularly to the right side of the image, because that is the part that's more in the background, and his left side is more in the foreground because they're tilted, because of the way they're tilted. So this is the part where you just sort of play around and see what you like. Now in that case, you can see that the gray was a little bit dark, so I've just come in with a bit more water to try to pull some of that gray, or dilute some of that gray pigment down so that it wasn't quite so dark. So I'm just now playing with the color to try to get everything blended nice and to try to get the shadow where I like. Now here I've put a shadow under his arm, and I kind of thought about it, and then I thought, oh, that's a little bit harsh. I can kind of see a lot of it. So what I did was I took a little piece of paper towel, and you can see here I dab it into just some water, and now I'm just dabbing it onto that area where I thought the shadow was a little bit dark, and it just lifted up enough of the pigment so that I liked it. Now you're going to let it dry. You can either heat set it or let it air dry. Now to do their muzzle, I'm using the Vintage Photo Distress ink. So just painting the color on. Now here you're going to see all of a sudden I go, oh, that's too dark. Once again, I'm going to use my paper towel to save it. This time I didn't add any water because I wasn't trying to dilute it. I was just trying to kind of lift it up. I just dabbed it on, and now I'm reapplying the color, but not quite so dark. Next I need to fill in the interior of their ears. For that I have two different red or pink inks, the Tattered Rose and the Worn Lipstick. So I'm smushing both of these on my craft sheet, spraying a little bit of water, and now I'm mixing the color. So first I started with the Tattered Rose, and then I used the Worn Lipstick. And you're going to see when that Worn Lipstick gets on there, it looks like those poor bears were shot in their ears, and I went, oh my heavens, that's too much. So there we go, I'm lifting up that red again. Poor little bears. Now we're going to heat set it. So next we need to cut these suckers out. So I'm using the matching Bear Hugs Creative Cuts, also by Mama Elephant. I laid it in place, and then I couldn't find my washi. It was hiding from me, so I used a little bit of masking tape. With the masking tape, you're going to want to be careful that you put it on really lightly so that it doesn't rip your paper when you lift it. Next, I'm going to create the base for the card. I'm using my favorite things, Dynamics. They're stacks inside and out diagonal stitched rectangle stamps. So I set it all up, I cut it. Now I'm laying everything in place to stamp my greeting. This is from the same stamp set, the Bear Hugs stamp set, and I've inked it with the Tuxedo Black from Memento. Now with the little bears, because you can see I'm moving them there, they weren't glued down. I've just put them in place so that I stamp the greeting where I'd like. So I'm using the thank you and then the cursive for being my pop bear underneath it. Once I've got those set up, I want to give the bears something to ground them so that they're not just floating on this little cardstock cut. So I'm using two different brown inks. I'm using Tea Dye and Vintage Photo. These are Distress inks. We're laying it out the same way we did before with smushing the ink onto the craft sheet, adding some water, with the spray gun and then using our watercolor brush. So we're going ahead and creating this sort of fade out of some earth, brown earth. Now you can also see above my finger, I got some ink transferred onto my hand, and I'm going to show you how I saved that. I'm spritzing it with a whole bunch of water, and now I'm going to use a clean paper towel and wipe it off. Depending how dark your color is and how much you have it, you might be able to save your project this way. Thankfully for me, it worked, because if it doesn't, then basically you just have to recut your paper. Nobody wants to do that and, you know, redo those steps, recut your paper, restamp everything. So that worked for me as a save, and I was happy with the way everything looked. So I've got my background down here, the earth, and everything's grounded. So now we're going to work to assembly. So I have cut a piece of the basil cardstock. Now I'm taking this outside from the stacks, the My Favorite Things die that I cut. I'm taking that outside and I'm just inking the edge using the Ranger blender tool. I'm doing the same with the inside of that die cut that has the greeting on it. So for that, I was just mainly using the tea dye. And then I decided I wanted a little bit more definition around the edge. So now instead of just doing the direct to the edge with the ink, I'm actually rubbing onto the project with the ink. Now I'm going back to the direct to edge. With this one, I'm using the vintage photo because it's quite a bit deeper and you can see it really sets off the border. So I've decided that I need to do the same with the outside die cut. So I'm back to using that tea dye, inking around the edge, kind of smushing things around, just so that it wasn't quite so stark, as I found it a little bit stark on the project. Now we're on to assembly. So we're just going to glue this outside frame directly onto the cardstock. This is always the part that I take a little bit long when I'm placing things down because I want to get them lined up correctly so that everything looks good and is all a uniform border around the edge. So that's kind of where it's good to take your time. Next, for the interior part, I'm going to put that on Pop Dots 3D foam adhesive so that it raises. And then the final assembly process is we need to glue that card front onto a card base. So I've simply cut a piece of cardstock the same size or slightly bigger and glued them all together to make my card. Thank you for joining me today, and for those of you making a card for your father for this Father's Day, happy crafting!